While I was looking back at my Lies of P gameplay, I stumbled on something I entirely overlooked: the fog wall. It was something I took entirely for granted while I was playing through the game.
Oh, I'm dead.
But once I took a real look, I realized it's definitely not the fog wall I'm used to. At least, not as I've typically seen in other Souls-like games. This barrier is dark, seemingly solid, and burns away like paper, in a game where almost everything has a reason. I was left wondering what exactly this barrier is. Well, its function is the same as any other boss barrier. The wall acts as a loading screen for the battle arena, as well as a way to stop players from cheesing preloaded bosses before their entrance cutscene. Yet its opaque style is unique from other Souls-likes, and it apparently lacks a lore explanation like fog walls in Demon Souls, Dark Souls, and Bloodborne. After a dive into Reddit, I still couldn't find much of anything talking about what this barrier could be, but I refused to believe in a game like Lies of P that there wasn't some reasoning behind the making of this wall. So after much Wikipedia detective work, I think I have a solid theory on what the lore is behind the Lies of P boss wall. First, let's talk about the FromSoft fog walls, so we can get an idea of the connections we are looking to make. In Demon Souls, Dark Souls, and Bloodborne, there are no direct references to these walls. However, the respective lores are so heavily steeped in fog, such that general assumptions can be made with a fair amount of believability. For example, in Demon Souls, the opening cutscene explains Boletaria was cut off from the world by a terrible fog that brought with it the demons. So these barriers the player encounters are thick veils of fog that enshroud the great demons that you will face. Similarly, in the Dark Souls series, the world began as a grey wasteland shrouded in fog during the Age of Ancients. After fire brought about light and dark, the boss walls are all that remains of this ancient fog. Finally, in Bloodborne, the story revolves around the introduction of horrific eldritch beings that are beyond human comprehension. Every step of the way, the player encroaches on the unexplainable by passing through the fog that softens these eldritch truths. While there are probably more in-depth theories for all of these, the point is that believable connections can be made from the world's lore to these boss fog walls. So what is the connection between the Lies of P lore and its boss wall? My initial thought was going to be Ergo, since the entire story revolves around Ergo and its uses. However, I think the connection is much deeper than this because of one small detail. The boss wall burns away as a deep green color. Ergo is typically blue, as we can see in our own fallen Ergo when enemies fade away, and in Ergo-based attacks used by various bosses like the Archbishop and Manus. My next guess then was the elixir Manus was using to turn humans like Victor and Lexazia into an evolved form of humanity, but the elixir is still not quite the right green color. The closest colors seem to be anything to do with acid, like acid converters and the green swamp monster. However, the green swamp monster Ergo didn't leave much to go on, as it only states that its origins are unknown, but attributed to the wrath of Krat. Honestly, there actually wasn't a lot of this green anywhere in Lies of P, until I looked into the cosmetics of all places. Here you can find the illusory emerald glasses. The description states, you may see illusions if you look beyond the emeralds. Thanks to the fine people on Wikipedia, I found more context about these glasses. As we know, Lies of P is based on the story of Pinocchio and hints at involving other fairy tales like the Wizard of Oz. Now apparently, in the Wizard of Oz, citizens of the Emerald City are given green spectacles to stop them from seeing the reality around them. Thus, this emerald green is associated with illusion and distraction. In terms of Lies of P, it follows that these emerald boss walls are intended to hide the corruption going on in Krat and distract the heroic puppet from making progress. Basically, these green boss walls are emerald lenses themselves. But who is putting up these illusory walls and why? Again, I started where most people probably would, with the main antagonist of the base game, Manus. But after you defeat the Archbishop, the following cutscene shows Manus collecting all of the Ergo released from the bosses that you've previously beaten. So Manus actually wants you to keep releasing Ergo to fuel his ascension, so there's no reason to think he'd be the one putting up these roadblocks. However, whatever god Manus is connecting with is a much better option. The Arm of God item description tells us that the alchemists are trying to revive a god, but he never answered. So who is answering Manus now? Well, thanks again to the wiki for giving context. The Arm of God is the left arm, which apparently signifies evil, betrayal, and illusion. Thus, we can infer that whatever god Manus is interacting with is using the alchemist for ill intentions and wants to keep the player from ruining his plans. To do this, the god puts up emerald illusory walls to mask the horrors ensuing in Krat to stop the puppet from stopping Manus. And with that, our theory is complete. This mysterious trickster god using Manus is putting up emerald barriers to hide the corruption growing in Krat so the heroic puppet doesn't foil his plans. Boss walls in Lies of P now have at least one lore explanation. If you have any ideas of your own, or I missed a piece of lore that could refine this idea, please let me know. Other than that, I hope you had a good time going down this lore rabbit hole with me. Have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.